Okay, we are looking at a hand from PokerStars Pennsylvania. I have Ace-2 suited on the big blind. We are playing 8-handed at 1-2, so we get a limp from a loose passive player here in MP1. So this player voluntarily puts money in the pot 37% of the time, 5% of the time they raise, 2% 3-bet, so this is going to be your standard loose passive player. Probably a pretty common playing style live. Online, these players tend to get waxed. They tend to bleed money pretty quick. So Villain, is a player we have some history with. We've played 12,000 hands with. Pretty standard tag online player. This player, I think, c-bets pretty often on the flop and turn. That's kind of their one interesting thing that they do. Let's see. Through 12,000 hands, this player has all-in equity adjusted of just north of $3,000. Their win rate is 22 big blinds per 100 hands played. That's some run good as well, obviously. But anyway, small blind goes ahead and folds. I go ahead and 3-bet here. I like to 3-bet suited aces, especially if I'm up against that late position raise. The villain, the villain's VPIP is 19%, raise 12, 3-bet 4% of the time. So, like I said, very standard, but that percent raise is going to be going way up on the button, especially whenever they only have one limper. They're probably going to be up and raising more like 30% of their hands here. So, for that reason, I think it's a good spot to 3-bet. Also, you do have some post-flop playability here. So, the villain goes ahead and 4-bets, which, immediately I know that my range is not going to be in great shape against a 4-bet. And the small 4-bet, I think, is a little bit odd. It's kind of like he's trying to just string me along. Also, I think that 4-bet sizing might be like, okay, I'm strong. I know that you're going to 3-bet me here because of the position setup. So he might be saying, hey, I'm going to make you pay a little bit more with those bluffs, with that king-queen offsuit, with that, ace-2, ace-5 suited. But also I'm a little bit worried that you have aces, so I want to be able to fold to a shove. That might be the thinking with this sizing. The sizing is just so curious. I mean, look, I could shove and rep aces since I have an ace blocker. I don't love to do that. And also, I don't know that he's just going to fold. Especially if he has pocket kings or pocket queens, he may, he's $70 in. He doesn't need perfect equity to call. So, he also might just be trying to induce. So it's a very interesting 4-bet sizing. I just, at this point, I have too much, whenever you only need to call $30 $113 in the pot, $113 in the pot, I'm going to be calling and seeing a flop and seeing what happens. Like I said, I think my opponent's range consists more of pocket kings and pocket queens than it does ace-king. Obviously, if my opponent has ace-king, I'm in a lot of trouble. So that's I think, the downside of calling with a hand like ace-2 suited. But I just, given the small sizing, I felt like I had to call. Now here we get the ace-6-6 flop, which is good. Obviously, we still lose to bigger aces, which is the main concern. But I am feeling pretty confident in my hand here. Kind of an interesting spot, obviously out of position. I'm going to check to the 4-better. Villain goes ahead and checks back. Now, at this point, they check back. They might be checking back very strong. They might be slow playing, their hand, just trying to get as much money in as they can with ace-king, with pocket aces. I just think it's very unlikely. It's super unlikely my opponent has pocket aces, given there's one combination of pocket aces in the deck. I just think, there's less, and this obviously limits the combinations of ace-king. Now that there's 2 aces out there between mine and the one on the board. So I think there's just so many pocket kings and pocket queens that my opponent could have right now. And I think the check is just an attempt to get to a cheaper showdown with their hand. Just generally speaking in poker, you want to check as the pre-flop aggressor whenever you're in position, whenever you have a marginally strong hand. Whenever you bet and even whenever you're c-betting, I mean, there's basically three reasons that you bet, right? You want to bet for value because you have a strong hand, and your opponent's going to call more often with a weaker hand than they're going to call with a stronger hand. You want to bet as a bluff. So on an ace-high board and like a single raise pot, even if you don't have an ace, sometimes it can make sense, or most of the time I think it makes sense to go ahead and c-bet there because you have more aces and you have more ace-king in your range, and you can bet a little bit on the larger side. You can represent the ace-king because if your opponent doesn't 3-bet you, they're not going to have ace-king in their range. You are, you can put pressure on even the weaker aces and, those other much more marginal hands that are going to be consisting in your opponent's range. And the other reason you want to bet is for protection, right? So if you have like a decently strong hand and you don't want your opponent to see a free card, maybe there's 2 spades on the board, you're worried your opponent might have a draw, something like that. Or just maybe they have a weak pair and you'd rather just scoop it up than risk them seeing another card, hitting 2 pair trips, something like that. But even when you're betting for protection, you should be much stronger than your opponent's range. So you want to be checking back those marginal hands, right? Those hands that you just want to get the showdown with, those hands that you can check, and then it might induce your opponent to make a bluff, and you can just kind of call down. And I think it very much makes sense with like pocket kings or pocket queens here to check, and then whenever your opponent bets into you, you have a call. I do think it's a little bit of a trickier call in this particular scenario for the villain, but I do think that it should be a call if I bet into them here, although you're kind of hating it. So I opt to go ahead and lead here for 70, half pot. Pretty big, I think. I could have bet a little bit smaller and still been in shape to either jam or, make a thin value bet on the river. The villain goes ahead and calls. Now, villain only has $65 left behind at this point, and this is one of those things where I didn't want to jam it all in right there because I think villain could fold pocket kings or pocket queens if I go ahead and jam. But if you make 2 bets and they just have to assess it each time, it's like, okay, well, I'm calling 70 and it could be a bluff, and then it's, oh, well, I'm only calling 65 into a $300 pot. Obviously, I'm not going to fold there. I'm pretty much pot committed. So, kind of an interesting spot. I think villain probably, I'd have a tough time calling a $70 bet unless I'm prepared to call a river shove, but, to each their own. It's a terrible spot to be in for the villain if they do have a weaker hand. And now if the villain does have ace-king, or if the villain has ace-king, they're just licking their chops, right? They're thinking, okay, great, this works perfectly. Villain's either going to bet out into me on the river and I get all my money in, or I can just jam it all in on the river myself and hope I get a call here. In any event, we go down to the river and we get the 8. So there's no flush draw on the board. There is 6, 7, 8. So 9, 10 is a straight, but when the ranges run so tight, and this villain only 3-bets 4% of the time, they're not going to be 4-betting. If they're only 3-betting 4% of the time, they're not going to be 4-betting stuff like 9, 10 suited, especially when they're in position. 9, 10 suited, I think, is a good hand to just call a 3-bet with and see a flop. So that's not in their range. The only thing you're worried about is ace-king. But again, because there's only 2 aces in the deck, there's more combinations of pocket kings, pocket queens, pocket jacks that may be inclined to call here than there are combinations of ace-king, ace. Although, ace-queen, I don't think the opponent 4-bets ace-queen. And to be honest, I don't know that the opponent 4-bets ace-king all that often. I just think if you're looking at how often they make certain moves with certain cards, I think ace-king probably should be a 4-bet a lot of the time, but I think a lot of people just call whenever they're in position. Probably the same with ace-queen. If he called my 3-bet, I think I'd feel a lot worse about this. I think the fact that the villain 4-bet has me feeling pretty good, especially with the weird sizing and then the way they played it with the check call line that they took. So we go ahead and see here. Villain does have the pocket kings, so that is a great scoop up for us. I don't think, and this is one where the hand kind of played itself in a sense. I don't think I necessarily did anything I think the villain was trying to get a little bit cute there with their 4-bet sizing. Had they sized their 4-bet appropriately, I would have folded. I think that's the one thing in this hand that happened that was just a little bit weird. Obviously, it worked out great for me. So, yeah, just an interesting spot.